Yep, thank you all for coming, and thank you for putting it on. And I do wear many hats, and I do spend the vast majority of my days dealing specifically with heroin. And I look out in the crowd, and I see many faces that I know, and the community plays a huge role in this and helping combat this. But heroin has been a growing problem in the Penn community over the last several years, and it's become one of the most prevalent drugs being used in our area. We've seen a dramatic increase in heroin use and overdoses, and we're dealing not only with the increased crime that comes along with that, but we see the effects it has on families and the community as a whole. And we need to work together with other agencies. We need to work with treatment, counseling, and education to help combat this. And while there are several agencies and specialty services involved in treating and combating heroin on a law enforcement level, like the other sheriff said and the DA said, funding is a big obstacle for us. Our office received a grant in 2011 under a burn grant that the sheriff had mentioned to purchase surveillance equipment. This equipment has been invaluable to us. We've used it effectively to investigate the sale of heroin and other controlled substances. However, this equipment it quickly gets outdated, and there's new technologies available now that have reoccurring costs associated with them to help combat this. We have limited manpower. We do not have anyone currently assigned specifically to investigate the drug problem. In Penn, I am the investigator, so I deal with drug cases, sexual assaults, any type of crime that happens. That's me. So with the way heroin's taken off in the last few years, it's been tough. It's been busy. We're dealing, on top of that, we're dealing with the increased availability of needles. When in years past in our community, in order to get needles, you'd have to become a member of a needle exchange program, and you'd have to travel to that needle exchange program to get needles. Now you can purchase needles at any pharmacy here in the village. And people purchasing those needles, they're not required to carry any paperwork as to where they were purchased or signed a log indicating that they purchased those needles. However, individuals purchasing pseudoephedrine are required to produce identification, and they sign a log that's used as a tool with law enforcement to combat the methamphetamine manufacturing. On top of the greater availability of needles, law enforcement can no longer effect an arrest on individuals carrying used needles with residual amounts of heroin in the needle. And while we understand the public health concerns and the fear that individuals may share or reuse needles, the availability and the ease at which a person can obtain them is a concern for law enforcement. We continue to see increased use of heroin and increased crime related to its use. There have been some effective steps and tools that have been taken and used, such as naloxone being issued to every officer, public health, and the sheriff's office. Both were great in implementing that. Naloxone is a medication that's used to reverse the effects of opiates, and it's especially used after someone overdoses. We were trained in that. Our office was trained in that in 2014, and every officer in our department was issued a naloxone kit. Since we've received that training, we've successfully used naloxone 11 times on individuals who have overdosed. We've also been present on several other instances where EMS has used it. And while there's been some progress, and there are several agencies and groups working towards stopping this problem, we continue to see an issue in this community. And law enforcement plays a key role in combating heroin. We're right on the front lines dealing with this stuff every day, and we're often dealing with people when they're at their lowest point. We don't only work towards arresting people and dealers and stemming the flow of heroin to the community, but we're also working on educating the public and working with the public to help tackle the issue. And I can't stress enough how important it is for the public to contact law enforcement if they see something going wrong. We're always available, and we love to have the public's input. And often law enforcement, I know that it's not the only tool here, but often that's the law enforcement intervention is the catalyst to push someone into treatment that they might not seek on their own. We continue to see major issues with it, and on our level, I think that we need funding, tools, and appropriate legislation to combat it. And I just want to thank everyone for coming.
Thank you, Investigator. Assistant DA Cook, can you give us a perspective from Chemung County, a little bit further south from where we've heard from?
Thank you, Senator O'Meara, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I don't think it is an exaggeration to use the term that heroin is a cancer that is really plaguing all of our counties. The number of people that are dying every day in Yates County or Chemung County or any of these counties. And another analogy, certainly we need all hands on deck. It's a law enforcement problem, it's a public health problem, it's an education problem. And we all have to contribute. I guess my perspective, and I'll share a couple insights that I've had, but certainly prosecution is where often sometimes the dam breaks. A parent discovers they've been stolen from. A child gets arrested for possession of forged instrument, forged checks. But when you hear the term heroin, I guess the distinction that I immediately make is there's a big distinction between people who are addicted and who are committing crimes to feed that addiction. Every day they get up. Where am I going to get my drugs? Where am I going to get my drugs? Where am I going to get my drugs? And those who are feeding, those who are dealing drugs, those who are selling to those who are then becoming addicted. I think that's a major distinction that we see. And certainly separating those class of defendants, those who are committing larcenies and other thefts to feed their own habit, and those who are willingly selling to everybody they can sell to make money, to profit from the suffering of everybody they're selling to, is a key distinction in the analysis. And every case is different on its own facts. But there is a reason why prison is authorized for the sale of drugs. And a practical thing that I've raised with Senator O'Mara, and I'm sure he'll bring it up, is in dealing with these crimes, the lab reports that we get for heroin and the statutes that govern heroin, the lab reports are typically for a single heroin dose are in the thousandths of percent. Like a single heroin dose, for example, it would be in a small envelope, glassine envelope, it would get sent to the lab. It would register 0.025, 25 thousandths of a gram. Right, so that would land on a prosecutor's desk. Now that is a minuscule amount quantity-wise. Certainly can be lethal. A single dose can be lethal. And as Sheriff Spike referenced, drug dealers often water it down. They cut it down because they want to make more money. They want to sell to more people, so they'll cut it down and mix it with fentanyl or some other drug component. And it's typically sold in bundles, 10 envelopes to a bundle. But the practical thing that I've raised with Senator O'Mara is it's different from, let's say, another controlled substance like cocaine. To get to a significant felony charge, you need to get 1/8 of an ounce. So doing a little bit of math, if you have a single dose that's 0.025, 25 thousandths of a gram, and you need to get to 1/8 of an ounce, which is 3.5 grams, to have a significant felony charge over someone, you would have, with a significant prison sentence. In other words, you're looking at a possession of a large amount of drugs for presumably a dealer, not someone who's just using every day for their own use, but a dealer, someone who's spreading this poison here in our community. You would have to have so many of those, it doesn't happen very often. So what I've suggested to Senator O'Mara is really a revamping, a changing of the penal law sections, because that's what governs what we do, the statutes, the law pertaining to heroin, because it is so much lighter, it is so much smaller and cut so differently than cocaine and other controlled substance drugs, that would allow prosecutors to seek higher grade felony charges for possession of the dealers that are peddling this poison and creating the addicts that is the cancer among us. So I proposed that to Senator O'Mara, and I think he'll certainly discuss that with his colleagues, but that would be a practical problem that we face in identifying the dealers. And again, making a distinction between those who are addicted, committing crimes for their own addiction, and those who are peddling, those who are selling to those and profiting from those that are becoming addicted to that. And that's certainly a big distinction that I've seen in Chemung County and throughout all the counties. And that's not to take away from any of the treatment component, or any of the aftercare, or any of the prevention, but that's simply from the prosecution perspective. And thank you again for all coming tonight.
Thank you, Jason. District Attorney Fazzari, thank you for being here. Joe.
Thank you, Senator. I'll keep this brief primarily because Senator O'Mara, my good friend, told me to keep it brief. 2 years ago, I sat at a hearing just like this in Elmira, at Elmira College. Senator O'Mara was present for that. And I heard somebody from Tioga County Treatment say that they had had 10 overdose deaths in the last 6 months. And I looked at the sheriff and I said, not in Schuyler County. We hadn't had any. I listened and I thought, boy, it sounds like it may be coming our way. And as the sheriff said, our probably number one drug in Schuyler is methamphetamine. But certainly in the last 5 to 6 months, I have seen just how wrong I was that it was going to be a problem. Schuyler County, second smallest. You guys are small, we're smaller. Second smallest county in the state of New York. We had 18 reported opiate overdoses in the last 4 months. We had 6 of those people die. Okay, so all of a sudden, this is a real problem, not just for the cities, but for places just like us. I have heard more times in the community in the last 6 or 8 months than I've heard in my entire 24-year career in Schuyler County. What are you doing about the drugs, Mr. Fazzari? And I said, you all think that we're doing nothing. You all may think that this table is doing nothing because you don't necessarily see us out there. And then I educate them on how in order to get somebody for selling drugs, you have to get somebody in. Okay? That's not easy to do because this isn't really like the city of Elmira where you can pull up on a street corner and hand $20 out a car window to somebody that walks up to your car and gives you a bag of heroin. Not in Schuyler County, not in Yates County. We don't have them standing on the street corner. We have them in houses, in apartments. So the neighbor comes up. I had one in my office yesterday from the county employee. She said, there's a drug dealer right next to my house. There's cars pulling in there all night long, all day long. What are you people doing about it? I said, well, it's the first that I've heard about it. But you live out in the country, and we can't exactly put a police car in your yard. We can't exactly put a patrol car or even an unmarked car on the side of the street. So what we need is for these people that get in trouble and they want to help themselves out, we need for those people to come to us or for our police officers to go to them and say, would you be willing to help us out? So I want you to understand it's not for lack of our attention to this because we all know it's a serious, serious problem. But we don't always have an in. And sometimes when we do have an in, we have to wait 6 or 8 months to make it so that when the person does get arrested, and I know a lot of people, a lot of bad things can happen to a lot of people in that time frame, but when we do get in, we can't immediately let them know that this guy was the informant, right? Because maybe we're using the informant for an ongoing investigation. So I want you to understand it's just not that easy for somebody in the community to come up and tell either one of the sheriffs or the officer from Penn that there's a drug dealer next to my house. We probably already know that, but we can't just get in. So in the interest of keeping this short, I would like to tell you that several years ago, I don't know if it was 7, 8 years ago, the state of New York, not necessarily these fine senators and our assemblymen, said the Rockefeller drug laws from the 1970s are draconian in nature. They're just bad laws, and our jails are overpopulated with drug users and drug dealers. And they said, we need to change that. And they changed it. And when they said we need to change that, the District Attorneys Association of the state of New York looked and said, that's going to create a problem. Well, here we are, 7, 8 years later, and we've got that problem. So my suggestion to you guys is help the people that are addicted for sure. Give the judges an out so they can help the people that are addicted. But as far as the people that are dealing these drugs, they got to go to prison. And I say put a mandatory minimum prison sentence, and you can give them a maximum sentence too, it doesn't matter, but they've got to do some sort of prison so that the judges, and I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody here, but sometimes we have some pretty liberal judges that think nobody should go to jail. Nobody should go to prison. Well, I'm telling you, you want to stop some of this from going on, you have to put these people in prison. The people that are selling it, that are making the money, like Assistant DA Cook said, there are people out there that are making money, and they're killing our own citizens. And so I say you create a stronger punishment for the dealers, and you create a special crime for a dealer that has provided heroin to somebody or another opiate, and they die, and that crime should be elevated, and it should be a separate crime. And I know there's other things that could be in there, but that should be a separate crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's very helpful, and it's a great segue into our second panel. We've got initially our largest panel out of the way. Thank you from the law enforcement perspective. A number of people I'm talking about on the panel. The next panel is our judges. We have the Honorable Patrick Falvey, Yates County Court Judge, and the Honorable Matthew Conlon, Penn Village Court Justice. I want to thank you, Your Honors, for both being with us this evening and hopefully being able to share some of your perspectives from the bench, and particularly as it regards drug courts and alternatives, or particularly lack of alternatives that you may see in the struggles you deal with, and how to handle some of these cases, particularly with regards to the addicts and that. And Judge Falvey, you've been our county court judge here in Yates County for a long time now. I thank you for your many years of service, and look forward to your perspective here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator O'Meara and senators and Mr. Assemblyman, and it's great to see everyone in the community here tonight and showing their interest in this very serious issue that we have before us. Among my duties as county judge and family court judge, etc., I preside over the treatment court, the Yates County Drug Treatment Courts, and have done that since its inception in 2002. And I just wanted to give a little overview of what our treatment courts are. Our treatment courts are a collaborative approach of the bench, the bar, which is prosecution and defense, treatment providers, probation, and law enforcement, and it's there to stem or attempt to stem the overwhelming impact of drug-related offenses facing the criminal justice system. Participants are those convicted of certain crimes who face the possibility of jail or a state prison sentence. Some have codependent disorders, such as mental health issues as well. The objective is to rehabilitate alcohol or substance abuse offenders while protecting the community by reducing drug-related crimes and reducing recidivism through a program of intensive court supervision and treatment. The ultimate goal that we are trying to attain is to break the cycle of addiction and create an environment which encourages law-abiding conduct, education, and gainful employment. Participants must be approved for participation after being evaluated to determine that they have a drug or alcohol abuse or dependency, and have agreed to participate by signing a contract to complete the program successfully. Participants are on probation. Some are even required to serve time in jail first, depending on their crime, and all agree to follow through with treatment and attend drug treatment court. They are subject to random drug and alcohol testing, and being drug and alcohol free for at least 1 year makes a participant eligible for graduation, followed usually by continuation on probation as a form of aftercare. Now, relapse or dishonesty will subject the participant to graduated sanctions, including community service, time in jail, or discharge from the program. In addition, appropriate conduct by a participant is as important as maintaining sobriety. It's an absolute requirement, in our opinion. Therefore, failure to conduct oneself appropriately by not following the rules or committing new crime may result in immediate expulsion and a potential sentence to prison. So, drug court is not easy. It requires the participant to take responsibility to achieve success. And since the inception of our treatment court, we have dealt with abuse of or addictions to alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamines, synthetic drugs, prescription medicines, opioids, and now, of course, heroin. That's why we're here. I believe, as many of my colleagues, that drug courts were created to differentiate between those with substance abuse disorders and drug dealers selling for profit. This gave us great latitude in determining the circumstances of a particular case in order to measure if a person truly was an addicted or dependent or was selling for profit. However, which has already been alluded to, in 2009, with the reform of the Rockefeller drug laws, legislation entitled Judicial Diversion Program for Certain Felony Offenders was passed. This expanded the type of drug and marijuana crimes that could be considered for drug court, including serious felonies involving persons who were selling drugs for profit. Now, this has caused us to struggle, for before, sellers were usually not qualified for the program, but now they can be by statute. For instance, we now need to consider and determine what is a sale under the law, for a sale does not always involve the exchange of money, or whether the person is selling to support a habit, or doing so for profit. Now, I also believe that use and sale of heroin is only the tip of the iceberg, for I see the influx of heroin, other drugs, and alcohol in our family court as well, with devastating effects resulting in child neglect, abuse, domestic violence, juvenile delinquency, educational issues. This leads to social and monetary costs to the community, not only for incarceration and foster care, but expenses for children born of addicted mothers and the general breakdown of the family unit. Currently, we are seeing more treatment court participants resulting from possession, sale, and use of heroin. In the past, approximately 69% of our participants were addicted in some form to alcohol, and now almost 90% are addicted to heroin. Yet heroin has been around for a long time. I recall its scourge when in Vietnam 46 years ago. It is still here today, however, because it's inexpensive and so dangerously addictive. It attacks the very social fabric of our community, our sense of order, children, families, and society. Therefore, I would respectfully recommend to this honorable panel the following. First, treatment options. In the long run, successful treatment does work, and the community and public health clearly, I believe, benefits, especially in the comparison to the costly temporary solution of housing a person in state prison or a child in foster care or detention for an extensive period of time, and recovery is still not achieved. Therefore, the state should encourage more Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services, called OASIS, certified treatment facilities with emphasis in the rural areas, and increase staffing for existing treatment facilities for all types of treatment, especially outpatient and halfway houses, including addressing specific treatment needs unique to women, children, and, yes, men. The Department of Health or OASIS or some other agency of the state should collect data to determine which treatment elements offer the most success for recovery of addiction, so that those elements can be incorporated into patient care statewide and avoid duplication of expense and time. For example, data on Vivitrol as a treatment element should be evaluated and treatment protocols examined to see what is most effective. The state could encourage health insurance companies to provide coverage for those treatment elements found to be most successful. Early detection. Prevention in the form of early detection of drug and alcohol use by our young people is key. More intensive monitoring by family and friends who are not afraid to speak up is needed to recognize there is an issue before they grow into the extent of heroin use. This would help address the demand, I believe, for the drug as well. Crime prevention. I strongly urge the legislature to consider modifying the judicial diversion statute by accepting out drug sellers in order to allow the treatment courts, in collaboration with law enforcement who are on our staffing teams, more flexibility to determine the eligibility on a case-by-case basis in order to determine if a person is truly addicted or is selling for profit. I believe the rise of heroin in our community shows the drug court concept is even more important and relevant now to help identify those who are substance abuse dependent versus one who is a seller. Although incarceration may be the necessary and proper temporary solution, I believe successful treatment provides the best chance for the better long-term result of recovery and a successful return to society. One of the 10 key components to the successful drug court is partnership with the support of the community, people such as yourselves. Together we have achieved some successes. We have 71 graduates to date. While at the same time, this current heroin epidemic has challenged us all, law enforcement, courts, treatment, to rethink and retool our assets in order to continue to assure community acceptance, community safety, and reduction in recidivism through judicially supervised treatment. I thank this honorable task force for the opportunity to address you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Falvey. And just briefly, before we move on to Justice Conlon, I'm going to go out of order on the next panel, primarily because my neck's getting stiff looking left for this long. So I'm going to go over to the right for another panel, all the way down to the end next. So get ready down there. I don't want you to sweat any more than you're already sweating, waiting for this to happen. And to go briefly, perhaps politically, back to 2009 when the Rockefeller drug laws were voted out, two of us here were in office, Senator Amador and myself. We were in the Assembly at that time in the Republican minority, and we both voted no on that action at that time. There was a period in New York State's modern history, the only 2 years of which the New York State Senate had a majority of Democrats. That was the year in which the Rockefeller drug laws were taken away. The next year was the year that the gap elimination adjustment was put in on our local school districts to cut into deficits that we had from overspending in New York State, which cut drastically into our schools and our programs and a lot of extra activities that I think would be helpful and useful for the prevention aspects of what we talk about as part of our processes here. That's just a side note, but I wanted to make it clear where I stood on the Rockefeller drug law reforms, and I know Senator Amador did as well. So with that, Justice Conlon.